Last week, we learned a bit about the Shema, mostly what it is and when we say it. But we still have a lot of questions to address, like what's up with covering our eyes, all the mumbling and kissing, and whether we're supposed to sit or stand. So let's take a few minutes to continue our journey through the Shema and see what we uncover this week. Now, there are a number of rules regarding the way in which we say the Shema. First and foremost, the Shema, particularly the first verse of the Shema, requires intention and focus. For this reason, many people find it helps if you cover your eyes. The Talmud teaches that the great rabbi Rav would cover his eyes with his right hand as a way of blocking out any distractions, so he could focus on his words. Some people simply close their eyes without using a hand. And there are even those who spell the word Shaddai, which is one of God's names, using their hands. 3 fingers for the shin, a bent thumb for the dalet, and a pinky for the yud. Then, when they cover their eyes, it's as if they are standing directly before God. When saying the Shema, it's necessary to actually say all the words out loud. There are some communities that will say all 4 parts in their regular speaking voice, but most will only say the first verse loudly and the rest in a whisper. The idea is to say the Shema loud enough so that your ears can hear the words of your mouth, but not so loud that you disturb your neighbors. It's also important to speak clearly when saying the Shema, especially when reciting the first verse. One should enunciate the ayin in Shema and the yud in Yisrael. If you're not careful, it could sound like you're using an aleph, which would change the word to Shema Yisrael, meaning perhaps Israel, and would strip any sense of certainty from this declaration. Likewise, we're careful to enunciate the dalet in echad, as it's easy to confuse a dalet with a resh, and that would change the meaning to Adonai is another, and would undermine the declaration of God's oneness. All right, and now for the big debate. Do we stand or sit for the Shema? As I mentioned earlier, in the Ve'ahavta section, we're instructed to say the Shema when we lay down and when we rise up. In the Talmud, the 2 schools of thought, Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, argue over what this means. Beit Shammai says this means you should say the Shema lying down at night and standing up in the morning. And Beit Hillel says it means you should say the Shema in whatever position you already happen to be in, whether you are laying down, sitting, standing, or walking. The Talmud then shares a story to help illustrate this disagreement. Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah were at a dinner party with their students. At one point in the evening, Rabbi Elazar happened to be standing up while Rabbi Ishmael was sitting down. When it came time to say the Shema, Rabbi Elazar sat down, just as was taught by Beit Shammai. And while he sat down, Rabbi Ishmael stood up. When asked to justify his actions, Rabbi Ishmael explained that if he had remained seated, then the students present might have thought that he followed the opinion of Beit Shammai. And as Rabbi Elazar made a point of sitting down, there would be no doubt to that ruling. But since Rabbi Ishmael stood up, the students would know that he follows the teaching of Beit Hillel, and that it's okay to say the Shema in whatever position one wants, or more accurately, in whatever position you happen to be in. All this is to say that there's no one right way to recite the Shema. If your community has the custom to remain seated when saying the Shema, then remain seated. If they stand in the morning and sit at night, like Shammai, then go ahead and do that. And if your community has the custom to stand anytime they say the Shema, then you can stand. However, according to the Shulchan Aruch, which is the central code of Jewish law, if a person makes a point specifically to stand up for the Shema, then that person is considered a transgressor, and that they go against a rabbinic teaching. With this in mind, why would a synagogue choose to go against rabbinic teaching and stand for the Shema? Well, that requires going back to Germany about 200 years ago. When rethinking synagogue services, the early Jewish reformers based a lot of their decisions on German Lutheran practices. These reformers noticed how their Gentile neighbors would stand up for the singing of the Nicene Creed, which was considered the central belief of their faith. They decided that the Shema must certainly be considered the Jewish creed, and therefore it would be fitting to stand for its recitation. However, when this innovation was introduced to Jewish services, those reformers would stand only for the first line of the Shema and then sit down for the remaining passages. All right, That was a lot to cover, but now we know so much more about how to say the Shema, and I'm sure this might have raised even more questions for you. Luckily, we have one more video to go as we continue our exploration of the Shema. So join me again next week for another Taste of Torah as we answer the rest of your questions about this central prayer.